You are watching One Book, One Review with Wiebke.
Unless you're new to this channel, you know that I love this book. And I never actually told you about Everything is Illuminated by Jonathan Safran Foer. And I just reread it, so here we go. Everything is Illuminated is simply put the story of a young writer going to Ukraine to find the woman who saved his grandfather in the Second World War. That's simply put the story. But of course it's Jonathan Safran Foer, so it's not that simple. We have basically three stories, sort of, and two narrators with three narrative voices. Are you confused already? Yeah, that's basically what happens when you read this book. We have the story of the voyage of Jonathan Safran Foer, the young writer, going to Ukraine in the summer of 1997. And he has a translator to guide him around, and that is Alex. And Alex is a young man just like Jonathan Safran Foer in the beginning of university and discovering who he is. And Alex is the narrator of the story of the trip going to Ukraine. So we get everything from Alex's point of view of what happens in Ukraine. Then we also have the story of Jonathan Safran Foer's ancestors. He basically tells the story of the little shtetl that his great-great-great-great-grandmother was born and where the family started from. And that is everything that Jonathan Safran Foer tells us from the past to now. And then we also have letters. Alex writes Jonathan letters after the trip when they start writing this book together, because they send each other the excerpts they already have written. That's why we always have something from Alex, the story of the voyage, then we have something from the village, Jonathan's story, and then we have a letter where they talk about the things that just were mentioned before. And that is where it gets interesting, because you get some refinement or questions and more information than the story actually gives you. And I really like that. When I read that the first time, it was a little bit confusing, yes, to find out like who's who, because there's many characters. There are a lot of people in there. But we basically have 2.5 narrators, because Alex tells the story of the trip in Ukraine and he writes the letters. We never get to see any of Jonathan's letters, but we know he writes them back. That is the basic build of the novel. We get these three parts alternating and always interweaving. And the longest part I felt, or I think from page-wise as well, is the story of Jonathan Safran Foer's family. And it is a weird story. It's not all that realistic. Some things he just clearly made up and, expanded. But that's okay. Let's have a look at the narration for a while. Like I said, we have three narrative voices. We have Alex when he tells a story, and throughout the book we can see that his story evolves and his storytelling, which is of course because Jonathan gives him tips on how to write. But also we see that his vocabulary changes. He's a non-native speaker and he kind of uses words funny sometimes. And throughout the book, he starts using the correct words instead of whatever Thesaurus suggests. And then we also have Alex writing the letters. And in the letters he has a different narrative voice. He's less confident, he's more insecure, and he's more honest. And I really like that you could see behind the facade that he built, and you can see throughout the novel how it crumbles and how he becomes more and more honest. And that's something that happens in this novel, talking about honesty. Looking at the narrative voice of Jonathan Safran Foer, I can only say I love it. It's just so natural, it just flows. It's like he's talking to you, like he's telling you the story and all these weird events and things that are going on, and his great-great-grandparents, and there are strange people and they have strange habits. But it's all very well narrated and you just flow with the story. Looking at the novel with the alternating stories, it can be confusing, and I have to admit, for the first I don't know how many times, I kept reading from front to back. But this time I took a different step to reading the book. I just started with the story of Jonathan's family, and then I read the trip, and then at last I only read the letters. And that made me understand a lot of things that I missed before. Not because it wasn't there, but because while reading through, you forget the names, you forget what was going on there. And reading it like this gave me a total new perspective to the story, and I just loved it. I would not recommend starting to read the novel and go like this, but read it once from front to back so that you know the story, that you know what's going to happen, so you're not spoiled in any way. But once you do that, when you want to read it again, I would recommend trying it, just reading the single storylines, the single narrators as a whole, because that gives you more out of the story, and that makes you appreciate the things that happen even more. And I just love that about Jonason's books, because they're just so amazing, and you can read them in so many ways, and they give you so much that it is amazing. Also, I love that he uses different ways to express himself, not only in the story, but also in the way he writes them down. How he uses charts to support what he's saying, and his use of space is amazing. On top of that, he doesn't really go with spaces between the words sometimes to express when something needs to be said so fast. Then he puts them together and there are no spaces between the words. It may be a little bit complicated reading in the beginning, but I just love that about his writing, that you never know what to expect. Of course, I would love to say that everyone has to read this book, but I know it's difficult, and I know it's not for everyone. One thing that is difficult for a non-native speaker, and maybe also for a native speaker, I don't know, the strange language Alex uses, because he's a non-native and he has a thesaurus. And as an English teacher, let me tell you, that is something dangerous for people. When they learn a language, they think to use, great words, even if the words don't always fit, but they sound good to them. So they use them, and that's what he does. He uses a lot of funny words sometimes, and it takes some time to get used to, and you need to be willing to want to. And if you're just learning the language, it can be even more complicated to deduct from the context what he's talking about. Nevertheless, I think it's worth it. Also, I think it's not a book for young readers, because everything that is said is very complicated and it needs a lot of processing. So if you're not a mature reader yet, let's say mature reader, not in putting an age there. If you're a mature reader and you're used to reading complicated books, give this a try. You're gonna get so much out of it. But if you're used to reading YA romances only, I wouldn't start with this. Start with something else if you want to venture into the adult book section. Okay, enough rambling about this book from me. You know I love it, and you know I could talk forever about it. So just let me know in comments what you think of the book. Have you tried it? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Were you confused? Let's talk about this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.